Well, hello there, and welcome to a short KinChunk focused specifically on your wrist joints. Now we have a few classes in the library around your wrist, but today I want to introduce a setup that I've just recently sort of uncovered or figured out. What I mostly like about it is that it's very convenient to do from just sitting in a chair. So this whole class is going to only involve a single prop, which is a nice surface to sit on, and all you're going to be doing is sit on it. So anything that you want to sit on will work fine, okay? Other than that, you're just going to need your wrists, a little focus, and we'll dive right in, all right? So to get started here, let's just recall what the fundamental motion of your wrist joint is, what that capsule CAR is for your wrist, and we'll do that with both wrists at the same time. And to help you, and we'll talk a lot about this, to help you feel how your elbow motion is not your wrist motion, I want you to block your forearms on your thighs. Okay, so find that block and set up in a way that your wrist joint is just free of your knee so that you're not going to run into that lower leg or that knee when we start the motion. Okay, so forearms on thighs. And then what I also like about this position is it lets us really anchor in and feel strong, because even though the wrist joints are small, they're extremely sturdy and stable. So we actually need to apply some real forces if we want to create a change there. So setting up forearms heavy, go ahead and increase that intensity further by making two tight fists, and then feel into that capsular motion of the wrist by going hammer down and then hammer up. And as you get a sense of this motion, don't be tempted to get more motion by simply turning the forearms or lifting the forearms, but really stay focused on keeping those forearms stuck to the legs, keeping them heavy, and then feeling that independent motion of your wrist, which will show up as contractions along the sides of your forearms. So as my knuckles go down, I'm feeling contraction on the knee side of my forearm and wrist, and then as I go hammer up, you're going to feel this contraction on the top side of the wrist, the ceiling side of the wrist. Okay, just give yourself a few more like that. And don't forget about the goal of warming things up. So tight fists, heavy forearms, all of that will ask for some muscular effort, and that means blood's flowing, you're warming up. All right, and let that go. Okay, now shifting focus to just one wrist, we're going to turn the forearm. So now if you were wearing a wristwatch, that wristwatch would be pointing up, but we still want the forearm blocked on the thigh, and we still want the wrist just free of the knee, and then your other hand can kind of be a monitor hand here. Okay, so with this position of the forearm, block it, make that forearm heavy, and now go pancake flat with your hand, and let's explore how much you can flex just the wrist. If you notice your fingers turning, realize that's finger motion and not wrist motion. And then start to move into a thumb side flexion or medial flexion, and then into extension, palm out in front of you, and then pinky side or lateral flexion of the wrist joint to get back. Okay, and then we'll tick-tock that full wrist CAR back the other way. And it is a circle, but it's not a perfectly round circle. So as you go through it, you'll notice spots that are jerky and jumpy, and those are spots to go slow and really find what muscles are contracting to get you there. But it might not be possible to fix or improve right off the bat. So just note it if that's the case. All right, and wrap up that wrist, shake it out a little bit. Let's do the same thing on the other side. So wristwatch up, other hand is blocking that wrist and helping keep it still. And then we'll begin that wrist CAR, palm towards knee, to really feel that that palm stays flat, but we're getting all of that motion right from the wrist joint. And then thumb side, extension, pinky side, and back to flexion, and then we go the other way. Going slow, Not being tempted to turn this into an exercise, but keeping it as an awareness building activity. Maybe that's just wordplay, but I really do think it makes a difference in terms of how you're focused, what you're aware of, and how deep into the sensations you can actually lean into and feel into. And that awareness will really determine how much you can get out of the next part of the class, the isometric part. Okay, and go ahead and do one more or finish up the one you're on. Feeling no motion in your forearm, and let that go. Okay, so right now I feel a little bit of a pump in my forearms, both the top of the forearm and the bottom of the forearm. So I hope you do too. If not, you could just play with a little bit more intensity pushing into each of those corners. All right. So now we're getting right into the meat of what I wanted to dig into today, which is the isometric to improve usually the stickiest part of the wrist CAR, which is that thumb side flexion or that medial flexion. And when you don't have much motion there, what that tells us is that your wrist, for many different reasons, we don't need to know the reason, but for whatever reason, your wrist is not able to open on this outer side. And if the wrist isn't able to open there, then it will be limiting your ability to, let's say, go into quadruped or a push-up position or a handstand position. It's also going to be limiting your strength and your capacity in flexing your wrist, or even honestly the strength of your grip. Okay, so it's really affects a lot here. So now instead of using the top of the thigh, you're going to shift your forearm to the side of the thigh, and you can step your leg wherever is comfortable. And then make that fist, and again, have enough clearance so that we can pull that fist over and get the thumb side of the wrist notched right around the knee joint, okay? When you do that, I want you at first to just pull enough that you actually feel, oh, I'm almost trying to pull my elbow off my thigh, and just let that happen at first, okay? Because that tells you that tissue is tight, and so it's dragging the elbow off the thigh. On the same point, we could pull that elbow into the thigh and drag the thumb off, or drag the fist over, okay? So what we want to ease into now is, where is end range stretch? Might not feel like a stretch at first, but we're trying to find some length feeling or some opening sensation in this outside of the wrist. Okay, let's just spend a minute here trying to locate that, micro adjusting, not letting the wristwatch turn away from the ceiling, but figuring out how we can really access end range position here. Breathing, finding your setup, getting stable feeling. Okay. All right, now give yourself one more breath. If you need to come out of this position and come back in, that's totally fine. But then once you're ready and once you're set up, we're going to start doing a Pales contraction for this outside of the wrist joint. So don't move your setup, but take a look here that I'm going to be trying to bring my knuckles back across this way, but I'm going to use my other hand strength as well as my arm and shoulder strength to keep my elbow tight so that nothing is actually able to move. And that means that we're funneling all of that tension right into the outside of the wrist joint. Okay, so turn on that Pales contraction clearly, and then relax it. And as you do, you might find, oh, I can pull myself into a little bit more stretch on the outside of the wrist. Okay, we're talking micro adjustment. And again, another Pales, trying to bring your knuckles across, feeling contraction on the outside of your forearm, turning it up a little hotter this time, and then relaxing into it. Okay, again, if you need to adjust, that's fine. And then our final one here, this is going to be maximum intensity, okay? So go ahead and find that end range stretch. Begin ramping up knuckles, trying to move outward. And then turn that Pales contraction up to the highest intensity that you can manage, that you can maintain. 10-second hold. 5, 4, 3, 2, and slowly relax. Okay, let that go. So as we let that go, let's feel right away into how we can then control and move into that end range position, which is again just our capsule CAR. So I go again, forearm on top of thigh. Now my wristwatch is out to the side. Take my fist, so I have my kind of hammer set up, and I'm feeling actually that very same tissue we were just stretching, now contracting and shortening to get me into hammer down, and then thumb side contraction to get me back into my stretch, and down. Okay, so for some of you KinStretch nerds, you might be noticing, hey, hammer up in this position would be a rails contraction for the position we were just doing, and you're absolutely right. And the reality is all of our CARs are essentially rails contractions, just right in a row. If that sounds like words, then just let it go, no worries. Just keep going with your wrist capsule. Okay, so we're just reminding the brain how to move in and out of that new position and that new tissue that we just accessed. Oh, okay, so that hand is cooked for me for a moment. I'm going to let it rest, and I'm going to shift our focus to that medial flexion for the pales contraction on the outside of the wrist. So I again find the outside of my thigh. I drag my knuckles over until I feel my elbow starting to come off. And then when I do and I bring my elbow back, if I can keep my knuckles pinned to my knee, I have a chance to really open up a clear stretch on the outside of the wrist. Okay, so take your time there. I'm going to spend about a minute here and really do, make the adjustments needed to get into a comfortable position. Give you a little better angle here. Because if your body is uncomfortable or you're holding undue tension, you're not going to be able to focus on that outside of your wrist. Okay. Now from here, again, the pales contraction would be a motion like this, but without allowing any actual motion. So find your end range again. And then begin ramping up the effort of trying to bring your knuckles away from your body. Turn that up, feel that tension, and then relax that tension and try to pull yourself into a little deeper stretch. Okay? Now, one little subtlety here that might help you quite a bit is as your knuckles go out on this second round, also think of making your wrist joint actually heavy into your knee. So it's feeling the leverage a little differently. So knuckles start ramping out. And then I'm making my wrist heavy as well. And I'm really finding that contraction or that tension on the outside of the wrist. And then relaxing into it. Okay. Feel free, as I said, to come out of this and then get back into it. Making yourself comfortable. And then here we go, our final effort here. Start trying to swipe those knuckles outward. As you do, increase that intensity. Make the inside of the wrist heavy into your knee. And then find your maximum effort here. 10-second hold at maximum. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and melt it away. Okay, once you're back to zero, it's gonna hopefully feel like something new and different in there, because that's the whole point. We're trying to open up new tissue so that the wrist can be loading through more tissue, okay? And then let's go forearm on top of the thigh, wristwatch out to the side, and then we go with our hammer up, hammer down, wrist capsule CAR. Last couple reps here. And let it go. Okay, so now that both wrists, we've sort of expanded some range, now we might want to help the body feel into how to actually use that greater amount of capsule space in the wrist to find a different experience and different tissues into flexion and into extension. So to that end, go back to your first side, go back to your wristwatch on top, or rather pointing up to the ceiling, that sort of position for your forearm, and then you're going to get your palm to come down towards your shin, which means we're getting into wrist flexion. And when you get close to that actively, then you can use your other hand, slide that thumb under the wrist, and use your hand to just try to find a little bit more. So we're getting into a passive range. And ideally, find a passive range stretch for this top side that allows you to just barely touch your knee, okay, with your palm. So I'm barely touching. Now, as you start to turn on your tension in your wrist, you're going to try to feel the specific muscles that would push your palm into your knee or keep your palm connected to your knee, so that as we take this other hand away, you're holding on to as much of that wrist flexion as possible. I'm feeling a near cramp on the thigh side of my forearm here, and I'm really focused on my palm to knee, not fingers to shin. 3, 2, and 1. Relax it. Okay, we're just going to do one more like that. If you didn't cramp on that round, I want you to try to get closer to that cramp. So I'm finding the end range position where I'm barely able to stretch my palm to my knee. And then start trying to touch the palm or press the palm into the knee tissue. And slowly take the hand away, holding on to as much of that position as you can. You can maybe see here my palm has left my knee, but I'm still trying to send palm to knee so I can get that near cramp contraction in the bottom of my forearm. 3, 2, 1. Whew. Okay, quite intense. So you might feel like, oh, now I'm stuck here. Well, lucky for you, now we're going to do the opposite. So now go wristwatch down, so your palm's up, and we're going to get that back of the palm to stretch again towards the knee, ideally barely touching the kneecap. Okay, just take a moment, and probably it'll feel like a nice stretch in those tissues. Okay, but we're not going to hang out in a stretch here. We're going to try to find the contraction in the top of the forearm that would pull your knuckles into your knee. So start trying to feel those tissues, basically that would keep your wrist in this position as you then take your hand away and hold on to as much of that extension shape in your hand as possible. Really using a full body type intensity, even though we're just focusing on this tiny joint and these small muscles of your forearm, and then relax it. Okay. So this is a really nice way to customize this setup no matter your wrist flexibility, because let's say this is as far as you could stretch, you would still be trying to do the same thing, knuckles to knee, okay? On the same token, if you had way more range of motion, same goal, knuckles to knee. Okay, here we go for our final extension rep on this side. Start trying to feel the active effort of bringing your knuckles towards your knee. And then once you feel it, take your hand away. Full body effort. Maybe you can see my arm is shaking here. I'm trying to pull my wrist into as much extension as possible. 3, 2, 1, and whew. Relax it. Wowzer. Okay, let's wrap this wrist up with just one more wrist CAR. So we'll go palm up so we can retest in the same position we tested in. Palm to knee, that should feel more familiar. Thumb side flexion, that should feel a little bit more open. Knuckles towards arm. And then pinky side. And then we'd go the same path in the other direction. Again, just giving the brain a chance to sort of integrate those inputs we just gave the wrist and noticing how it's different from our first rep. Okay, and shake that out. All right, so now all we have to do is get in those same passive range holds for the other side. Okay, so for this side, we'll begin with wristwatch up or palm down, and then use the other hand to stretch the forearm, the top of the forearm, and stretch the wrist into end range flexion. So I'm trying to get my palm to my knee. Once I've found that end range stretch, that passive range position, try to start feeling the effort or the contraction of what muscles would pull your palm towards your knee. Then keep that as you take your hand away and hold it. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Melt away that effort. See if you can get into even a little bit more flexion. And then slowly start ramping up the contraction in the bottom of your forearm and your grip muscles of what would pull your palm towards your knee. Real full body type effort. Take that hand away and hold on to as much of that position as you can, feeling tons of work happening in the forearm and even in the rest of the body, rest of the arm. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, let that go. Again, near cramp feeling in the forearm is the kind of fatigue that we're looking for to tell this tissue to work better, to work more efficiently. Okay, now going into extension, flip that forearm upside down, wristwatch down now, and I'm using my other hand to find end range extension, passive end range extension. Wherever that might be for you, start turning on the feeling of knuckles to knee. And then once you register that, try to keep holding on to that and intensify that as you take your passive support away and have a passive range hold here. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Relax that effort. Just going to follow up with one final effort. Really taking time to pull yourself into end range so you can't stretch any further. And then begin locating that contraction, knuckles to knee. Once that registers, take your hand away and try to hold on to as much extension shape in the wrist as possible. 5, 4, knuckles to knee, 3 more, 2, 1, and relax. Okay, so it's quite intense, and again, that's because this joint is small but mighty, and so we need to use intense efforts if we actually want to change the situation there. All right, final wrist CAR here. We'll go again, wristwatch up, use your other hand to block your forearm, and get back to that now familiar flexion shape. Thumb side flexion, smoothly rolls into extension, smoothly rolls into pinky side flexion, and then palm to knee is where we reverse course. Just trying to find a smooth path through your end range. I'm never interested in you trying to find a range that's not available. I just want you to map and control the range you do have, okay? Once you finish your CAR, let that go, feel into your wrists, and then know that next time you use your wrists for push-ups, quadruped, pulling, whatever you might need your wrists for, they're going to be a little upgraded. All right, let me know any questions and have a great day.